The galactic freight station known as Vendara's Cradle floated in the darkness of space like a metal flower, waiting to bloom with life and commerce from 100 different worlds. And on this particular day, it was about to receive visitors that would change everything. The galaxy thought it knew about survival and danger and the strange creatures called humans. Ambassador Kethviri stood near the main docking bay with his crystalline body catching the artificial lights of the station and sending tiny rainbows across the metal walls around him. And he watched the airlock with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness that he had not felt since his first diplomatic assignment many years ago. The Silithians were a peaceful species from a world called Harmony Prime, where the gravity was low and the weather was always perfect, and nothing ever tried to eat you or poison you or crush you under falling rocks. And Kethviri had grown up believing that the universe was mostly a gentle place, filled with reasonable beings, who solved their problems with words and compromise. Then he had learned about Earth. The reports had come through the diplomatic channels 6 months ago when the humans first made contact with the greater galactic community, and Kethviri had read them with growing horror and disbelief. Wondering if perhaps the translation software had made some terrible mistake, Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, which meant it was one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy where intelligent life had somehow managed to evolve, and the list of hazards was so long that Kethviri had needed 3 separate reading sessions just to get through the basics. The planet had extreme temperature swings that could freeze water solid or boil it into steam depending on where you stood and what time of year it was, and the ground itself would shake and split open without warning, in events the humans casually called earthquakes, and giant storms of wind and water would tear across the surface, destroying everything in their path. But the weather was not even the worst part, because Earth was also filled with creatures that seemed designed by some mad god specifically to kill anything that moved, and the humans had apparently spent millions of years fighting these creatures for the right to exist. There were animals with massive teeth that hunted in packs and could run faster than most species could think, and there were tiny insects whose bite could cause paralysis or death within hours, and there were plants that would poison you if you touched them, and fish that would sting you if you swam near them. And even the water itself was filled with microscopic organisms waging constant biological warfare against each other and anything else that entered their domain. And the humans had not just survived all of this, they had conquered it, building massive cities and spreading across their entire planet until they were the dominant species, and now they had built ships and come to space looking for new friends and new adventures. The airlock hissed open, and Kethviri straightened his diplomatic sash and prepared to greet the newcomers with all the formal dignity that his position required. What came through the door was not what he expected. Captain Elena Vasquez was a woman of medium height with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that seemed to find something funny about everything they looked at, and she walked with a loose, easy confidence that suggested she had never encountered a situation she could not handle. Behind her came her crew, 5 humans of various sizes and shapes, and they were all laughing about something and pushing each other in ways that looked violent but were apparently friendly, and the noise they made filled the docking bay like an invasion of sound. "Hey there," Captain Vasquez said, walking right up to Kethviri and extending her hand in the human greeting gesture he had studied. "You must be the welcoming committee, and let me just say, this station looks amazing compared to some of the dumps we have docked at recently." Kethviri carefully touched his crystalline fingers to her fleshy ones, marveling at the warmth of human skin and the strength he could feel coiled in her grip, even though she was clearly being gentle with him. "Welcome to Vendara's Cradle," he said through his translator. "I am Ambassador Kethviri of the Silithian Consulate, and I have been assigned to help your crew navigate our facilities and customs during your stay." "Fantastic," the captain said with a wide smile. "First thing we need to navigate is wherever you keep the drinks. because Dave here bet me 20 credits that alien beer would taste like engine coolant, and I am very eager to prove him wrong. The one called Dave was a stocky man with thick arms and a beard that covered most of his face, and he grinned at Kethviri with absolutely no shame about his rude prediction regarding their beverages. "No offense meant," Dave said. "I am sure your beer is great. I just have very specific standards when it comes to getting drunk." Kethviri did not know how to respond to this, so he simply led the humans toward the station's common area, where dozens of different species mingled and traded and shared stories from across the galaxy. And he watched with fascination as the newcomers reacted to each new sight with excitement rather than fear. The common area was a large circular room with tables and chairs designed to accommodate many different body types, and the walls were lined with food synthesizers, programmed with recipes from hundreds of worlds, and the air was filled with the sounds of alien languages being filtered through universal translators. The humans found a table near the center of the room, and immediately began ordering drinks and food, complaining loudly when the beer tasted strange to them, but drinking it anyway with expressions of stubborn determination. "This is actually not terrible," Captain Vasquez announced after her third sip. "It kind of tastes like what would happen if regular beer and cough medicine had a baby, but I have definitely had worse." Other species in the common area were watching the humans with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, and Kethviri noticed that several of the more timid races had quietly moved their tables further away from the loud newcomers. He could not blame them, because there was something unsettling about the humans that went beyond their strange appearance and loud voices, something that his instincts recognized as dangerous, even though they were being perfectly friendly. It was the way they moved, he realized. With a predator's awareness of everything around them, even while they seemed relaxed and distracted, and it was the way they laughed at things that should frighten them and complained about minor inconveniences while ignoring genuine hazards. These were creatures shaped by a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they had responded not by becoming cautious and afraid, but by becoming bold and reckless, and somehow convinced that they could handle anything the universe threw at them. Kethviri made a note in his diplomatic file that read, "Humans appear sociable, if crude, and potentially useful trading partners with no apparent threat." And he felt satisfied that he had accurately assessed the situation. He had no idea how wrong he was, and he had no idea that within a few short days he would witness something that would change his understanding of courage and danger and the terrifying potential of the species called humanity. But for now, he simply watched them drink their strange beer and tell their loud stories, and he wondered what possible adventures could await such bizarre and fascinating creatures in the vast darkness of space. 3 station cycles had passed since the humans arrived, and Kethviri had started to think that maybe they were not so different from other spacefaring species after all, just louder and stranger and more fond of drinking than most. He was wrong about that, and he was about to find out exactly how wrong, in the worst possible way, the attack came without warning on what had seemed like a perfectly ordinary day, when the station's proximity alarms suddenly screamed to life and the lights flickered red, and a voice on the intercom announced that all residents should remain calm and proceed to their designated safety zones. Kethviri was in his office reviewing trade documents when the first explosion shook the station, and he felt his crystalline heart freeze with terror as he realized that this was not a drill or a malfunction, but something far more terrible. The Vorthax had come. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Vorthax, those massive chitinous pirates from the Outer Rim who raided stations and ships and colonies with brutal efficiency, taking whatever they wanted and killing anyone who tried to stop them. And they had apparently decided that Vendara's cradle would be their next target. Kethviri tried to reach the safety zone, but he was too slow, and within minutes he found himself rounded up with dozens of other station residents and herded into the main concourse by Vorthax warriors, who stood 8 feet tall and carried weapons that could vaporize flesh with a single shot. The station's security force had surrendered almost immediately, which was not surprising since they were mostly Pylaxians whose idea of conflict resolution involved sending strongly worded letters of complaint, and now everyone was a hostage waiting to find out what the pirates wanted. The Vorthax commander was a nightmare made real, standing 9 feet tall with scarred chitin armor that showed he had survived countless battles, and his compound eyes swept across the terrified hostages with cold calculation as he decided their fates. His name was Scrix, and he had been raiding the space lanes for 30 years without ever meeting a force that could stop him, and he carried himself with the absolute confidence of a predator who had never known fear. "This station now belongs to the Vorthax Dominion," Scrix announced, his voice a harsh clicking sound that the translators struggled to make understandable. "You will provide us with fuel and supplies and valuables, and those who cooperate will be allowed to live, and those who resist will learn why we are feared across the galaxy." Kethviri huddled with the other hostages, his crystalline body trembling with fear as he watched the Vorthax warriors patrol the concourse with their weapons ready. And he wondered if this was how his life would end, far from home on a station that smelled like alien food and recycled air. Then he noticed something strange. The humans were sitting in the corner of the concourse near one of the food synthesizers, and they were still drinking. And one of them was telling a joke while the others laughed quietly among themselves. They did not look scared at all. Kethviri stared at them with disbelief, wondering if perhaps they did not understand the danger they were in, or if maybe their brains worked so differently that they simply could not process fear the way normal species did. Scrix noticed them too, and his compound eyes focused on the group of humans with sudden interest, and he began walking toward them with his bladed limbs clicking against the metal floor. "You," Scrix said, pointing at Captain Vasquez with a limb that could cut through steel. "I have heard stories about your species since you joined the galactic community, stories that say you come from a death world and that you are somehow dangerous despite your small size and soft bodies." Vasquez looked up from her drink with an expression of mild annoyance, like someone who had been interrupted during a pleasant conversation rather than someone who was being threatened by a 9-foot murder machine. "We have our moments," she said calmly. "I wish to see if these stories are true," Scrix continued, and his mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. "You will fight my lieutenant in single combat, and if you somehow manage to win, your crew will be released unharmed, and if you lose, then you will all die slowly as an example to others who might think about resisting us." The Vorthax lieutenant stepped forward, and he was only slightly smaller than Scrix himself, with razor-sharp chitin covering every part of his body and 4 arms that ended in blades and claws, and he looked at Vasquez like she was already dead. Kethviri wanted to scream at her to refuse, to beg for mercy, to do anything other than accept this impossible challenge. But his voice would not work, and his body would not move, and all he could do was watch Vasquez slowly set down her beer and looked at the Vorthax lieutenant with calm, assessing eyes, studying him the way a scientist might study a particularly interesting specimen. And then she looked back at her crew. "Dave," she said in a voice that carried across the suddenly silent concourse. "Hold my beer." Dave took the bottle from her hand with a grin that Kethviri did not understand, and the other humans in the group went very still in a way that reminded him of predators preparing to strike. And the air in the room seemed to change somehow, becoming charged with an energy he could not name. Kethviri noticed that Dave was not watching the captain at all. He was watching the other Vorthax in the room, and his eyes were moving between them with a calculating intensity that seemed completely different from his usual cheerful demeanor. Something was about to happen. Something that Kethviri sensed would be terrible and wonderful, and unlike anything he had ever witnessed in his long diplomatic career. Vasquez cracked her neck and rolled her shoulders and stepped toward the Vorthax lieutenant without any weapon or armor or protection of any kind, just soft human flesh against chitinous razor blades, and she smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "All right, ugly," she said. "Let us see what you have got." The Vorthax lieutenant roared and charged at her with all four arms raised to strike, and Kethaviri closed his eyes because he could not bear to watch this brave, foolish human be torn apart. He heard sounds of impact and crunching and a high-pitched shriek that did not sound human at all, and when he finally forced himself to open his eyes again, he saw something that his brain simply refused to process. The Vorthax lieutenant was on his back on the floor, and Captain Elena Vasquez was standing over him with her knee on his throat and a piece of his own chitin armor pressed against the soft tissue beneath his mandibles. The entire fight had lasted 11 seconds. The room was completely silent except for the lieutenant's ragged breathing and the quiet sound of Dave finishing his drink and saying 4 words that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. "Now it is my turn." The silence in the concourse lasted only a heartbeat before it shattered into chaos. And Kethaviri found himself witnessing something that would haunt his dreams and fill his diplomatic reports for the rest of his very long life. Commander Scrix stared at his fallen lieutenant with compound eyes that could not seem to comprehend what they were seeing, and then he turned those eyes toward Captain Vasquez with a fury that made his chitin rattle and his mandibles click with rage. "Kill them!" he hissed. And 4 Vorthax warriors surged forward with their bladed arms raised and their weapons forgotten in their eagerness to tear the humans apart with their bare claws. Dave handed his empty bottle to a terrified Rillian who happened to be standing nearby and said, "Hold my beer," with the same casual tone someone might use when asking for directions to the bathroom. And then he moved toward the charging Vorthax with a smile on his bearded face. Kethaviri had studied many species during his diplomatic career, and he had seen many different approaches to combat, from the elegant dance fighting of the Quelix to the overwhelming swarm tactics of the Mentari. But he had never seen anything like what the humans did next. They fought dirty. Dave met the first Vorthax with a headbutt that cracked the creature's facial chitin and sent it staggering backward with ichor leaking from its compound eyes, and then he grabbed one of its own bladed arms and twisted it in a direction that arms were clearly not meant to bend. The ship's medic, a small woman named Chen, who barely came up to a Vorthax's chest, had somehow gotten behind another warrior and was climbing its back like it was a mountain made of murder. And she was screaming words that Kethaviri's translator rendered as, "This is for canceling Firefly," which made no sense at all but seemed to fill her with righteous fury. She jammed her thumb directly into the Vorthax's compound eye, and the creature shrieked in pain and tried to shake her off, but she held on with her legs wrapped around its neck and her other hand gripping its antenna like a handle. Another crew member, a tall, thin man called Rodriguez, had picked up a metal chair and was using it like a weapon, swinging it with enough force to dent chitin armor and knock Vorthax warriors off their feet, and he was laughing the entire time like this was the most fun he had ever had. The 4th warrior tried to grab Captain Vasquez from behind, but she had apparently expected this, and she dropped low and swept its legs out from under it and then stomped on the joint where its arm met its body until something cracked and the limb went limp. Kethaviri watched all of this with his crystalline mouth hanging open in shock, unable to move or speak or do anything except bear witness to the impossible violence unfolding before him. The humans did not fight with honor or technique or any of the formal combat traditions that civilized species had developed over thousands of years of warfare. They fought like animals, like the apex predators they had evolved alongside on their terrifying death world. They bit and scratched and threw objects and used their environment as a weapon, kicking enemies into tables and smashing them against walls and using the Vorthax's own size against them by staying close and attacking the soft joints where their armor did not protect them. Commander Scrix finally overcame his shock and raised his plasma pistol to end this madness with a single shot. But he had forgotten about the last member of the human crew, a quiet woman named Park, who had been sitting in the corner pretending to be scared. She had not been scared at all. She had been waiting, Park hit Scrix from behind with something that looked like a fire extinguisher, and the blow was so powerful that it actually knocked the massive Vorthax commander forward several steps. And before he could recover, she had somehow gotten the fire extinguisher nozzle into the gap in his chest armor and pulled the trigger. The chemical spray was not designed to harm organic creatures, but it was very cold and very disorienting, and Scrix roared with surprise and pain as the freezing foam filled the space beneath his armor and burned against his sensitive inner tissues. By the time he managed to tear his own chest plate off to escape the cold, Dave had finished with his opponent and was walking toward the commander with a broken chair leg in his hand and absolutely no fear in his eyes. "You know what?" Dave said conversationally. "I have fought worse things than you back home. There was this one bar in Vladivostok where the locals got really upset about a joke I told. And compared to that, this is practically a vacation?" Scrix swung at him with a bladed arm that should have cut him in half, but Dave simply stepped to the side like he had known exactly where the blow would land, and then he brought the chair leg down on the commander's wrist with enough force to shatter the chitin there. The commander screamed and tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go, because the other humans had finished with their opponents and were now surrounding him in a loose circle, all of them breathing hard and covered in alien ichor, but none of them seriously injured. Captain Vasquez walked through the circle and stood in front of the wounded commander, and she looked up at him with those calm, assessing eyes that seemed to find everything slightly amusing. "Here is what is going to happen," she said. "You and your surviving warriors are going to get back on your ship and leave this station and never come back, and you are going to tell everyone you know that this place is protected by humans. And if I ever hear about Vorthax raiders attacking civilian stations again, I will personally hunt down every single one of you and make what happened here today look like a friendly disagreement." Scrix stared at her with something Keth Viri had never seen in a Vorthax's eyes before. Real, genuine fear of a creature half his size who had just dismantled his entire raiding party with her bare hands and a group of friends who fought like demons from the darkest legends of the void. "We will leave," Scrix said, and his voice had lost all of its confidence and cruelty. "We will not return." "Smart choice," Vasquez said. And then she turned her back on him without any concern that he might attack, because she knew that he would not dare. 20 minutes later, the Vorthax ship undocked from Vendara's cradle and jumped to hyperspace, fleeing from a space station they had expected to conquer with ease, and the humans sat back down at their table and ordered more drinks like nothing unusual had happened. Kethaviri walked toward them on trembling legs, his crystalline body still shaking from everything he had witnessed, and he stood before Captain Vasquez with questions crowding his mind that he did not know how to ask. "What?" he finally managed to say. "What are you people?" Vasquez looked up at him and smiled that same calm, friendly smile she had worn when she first arrived on the station. "We are humans," she said simply, "and we take care of our own." Dave raised his fresh beer in a toast, and the other humans joined him, and Kethaviri realized that he had just witnessed the birth of a legend that would spread across the galaxy like fire. The legend of the Deathworlders. The story spread across the galaxy like a plague of words, jumping from ship to ship and station to station faster than any physical object could travel, carried by traders and travelers and gossips who could not wait to share the incredible tale of what had happened on Vendara's cradle. Within a week, every major trading hub in the sector had heard some version of the story, and within a month it had reached the far edges of known space. And by the end of the year, there was not a single sapient species in the galactic community that had not heard about the humans and their impossible victory. Kethaviri found himself at the center of a storm he had never expected, receiving communications from governments and corporations and military organizations across the galaxy, all of them desperate to understand what had happened and what it meant for the future. "Tell us everything," the Quelix ambassador demanded during one particularly intense diplomatic call. "Tell us exactly what these humans did and how they did it, and whether we should be preparing for war against them." Kethviri did his best to explain, but how could he describe what he had witnessed in terms that made sense to species who had never known true danger, who had evolved on peaceful worlds where survival was guaranteed and violence was a distant historical concept? He told them about the fight, about how Captain Vasquez had defeated a Vorthax lieutenant in 11 seconds using nothing but her bare hands and the knowledge of exactly where to strike, and about how her crew had taken down 4 armed warriors with improvised weapons and sheer aggression. But the thing that seemed to fascinate the galaxy most was not the fighting itself. It was the phrase that had preceded it. "Hold my beer," Kethviri explained to the Quelix ambassador. "It appears to be a human signal that indicates the speaker is about to attempt something dangerous or reckless or physically improbable. And this phrase always precedes violence." The ambassador asked. "Not always violence," Kethviri said, thinking back to his extensive interviews with the human crew. "Sometimes it precedes other activities, such as attempting to jump a ground vehicle over a gap that is clearly too wide, or eating food that has been chemically enhanced to cause extreme pain, or swimming in water that contains dangerous predators for recreational purposes." The ambassador stared at him through the communication screen with an expression of complete incomprehension. "They do these things willingly?" she asked. "For entertainment." "They do these things willingly," Kethviri confirmed. "And they are often recorded doing them and share the recordings with other humans who find them amusing." "They are insane," the ambassador said. "I believe the correct human term is adventurous," Kethviri replied. He spent the following months compiling a comprehensive report on human behavior and psychology, drawing on everything he had learned from his time with the crew of the Rusty Venture and his subsequent research into Terran history and culture. What he discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them constantly, and instead of becoming cautious and careful, they had become aggressive and creative and completely convinced that any problem could be solved if you approached it with enough determination and willingness to risk your own life. They had a hormone called adrenaline that flooded their bodies during dangerous situations, enhancing their strength and speed and pain tolerance to levels that other species could barely comprehend. And they had apparently learned to enjoy the feeling of this hormone so much that they deliberately sought out danger just to experience the rush. They had an ancient hunting technique called persistence hunting, where they would simply chase their prey across vast distances, running for hours or even days without stopping until the animal they were chasing literally collapsed from exhaustion. Because humans could run longer than almost any other creature on their planet, they had invented sports that involved hitting each other in the head repeatedly and running across fields while larger humans tried to tackle them to the ground, and swimming in freezing water and climbing mountains that had no oxygen at their peaks, and jumping out of perfectly functional aircraft with nothing but a piece of fabric to slow their fall. And they did all of this for fun. Kethviri compiled his findings into an official diplomatic advisory that he titled Understanding Terran Behavior, a survival guide for non-Deathworld species, and he distributed it to every government in the galactic community. The key passage was highlighted in emergency red text and read as follows. The Terran phrase, "hold my beer," is a verbal indicator that the speaker is about to attempt something dangerous, reckless, or physically improbable. And when a human utters these words, they are voluntarily disengaging the minimal self-preservation instincts their species possesses, and other species are strongly advised to establish a safe distance of no less than 50 meters before the subsequent action concludes, and if immediate evacuation is possible, it is recommended. The advisory became the most downloaded document in the history of the Galactic Diplomatic Archive military academies, added it to their required reading lists, and diplomatic schools made it mandatory for any student who might encounter humans in their career. and merchants who traveled to human space memorized the key phrases and warning signs that indicated danger was about to occur. A Rillian poet named Vescthri composed an epic poem about the Battle of Vendara's Cradle that became famous across the galaxy, and the final verse translated roughly as, "When the soft ones speak of beverages and request that you hold their fermented grain water, know that you stand at the edge of chaos and should remove yourself with great speed." The Vorthax themselves underwent a complete transformation in their approach to raiding, adding human assessment protocols to their standard procedures and training their warriors to recognize Terran ships and avoid them at all costs, and their commanders learned to check the crew manifests of any target before attacking to make sure no Deathworlders were aboard, and in bars and taverns and drinking establishments across the galaxy, servers and bartenders learned to watch for humans and listen for certain phrases. And when they heard the words, "Hold my beer," they would quietly begin ushering other patrons toward the exits, because the galaxy had learned an important lesson about the strange, soft creatures from the Class 12 death world called Earth. They had learned that humans were not to be underestimated, and they had learned that human recklessness was not a weakness, but a weapon. And they had learned that the most dangerous moment in any interaction with a human was not when they were angry or afraid. It was when they were smiling and handing someone their drink. That was when you should run. Kethviri received commendations from 17 different governments for his work in helping the galaxy understand humans, and he was promoted to Chief Diplomatic Liaison to Earth, a position that required him to actually visit the Death World itself. He was not entirely sure if this was a reward or a punishment, but he accepted the assignment anyway, because after everything he had witnessed, he had developed something unexpected for the bizarre, aggressive, wonderful humans. He had developed respect, and maybe just a little bit of fear. 10 standard years had passed since the Battle of Vendara's Cradle, and Ambassador Kethviri stood on the surface of Earth for the first time in his life, feeling the terrifying pull of the planet's gravity and watching the unpredictable clouds move across a sky that was far too blue and far too bright. He had prepared for this visit for months, studying the climate and the customs and the countless dangers that existed on this world, where everything seemed designed to kill anything that was not a human, and he had brought special equipment to help his crystalline body survive the harsh conditions. The gravity was the worst part, pulling at him with a force that made his joints ache and his movements slow, and he could not understand how humans lived their entire lives under this crushing weight and still managed to run and jump and fight the way they did. But he had come to honor the crew of the Rusty Venture on the anniversary of their victory, and he would not let a little thing like gravity stop him from doing his duty. The ceremony was being held in a human city called San Francisco, in a large building near the water where humans gathered to celebrate important events. And the room was filled with beings from across the galaxy who had come to pay their respects to the heroes of Vendara's Cradle. Kethviri had watched the crew become legends over the past decade, their story growing and changing as it passed from world to world until it was sometimes hard to recognize the actual events beneath all the embellishments and exaggerations. Captain Elena Vasquez had become a folk hero across the galaxy, the woman who had defeated a Vorthax warrior in single combat and faced down an entire raiding party without fear, and her image appeared on posters and in entertainment programs and even on the hulls of ships whose crews hoped her legend would protect them. Dave had somehow become a diplomat himself, using his strange combination of friendliness and implied violence to negotiate trade agreements and resolve disputes between species who had been fighting for centuries, and his catchphrase had become famous enough that it was now included in first contact protocols as something to watch for. Chen had written a best-selling memoir called They Really Should Have Run, that had been translated into over 300 languages and was required reading at military academies across the galaxy, and she now traveled from world to world giving speeches about human history and combat philosophy. The other crew members had found their own paths as well. becoming teachers and explorers and advocates for human-alien cooperation. And together, they had helped transform humanity's reputation from dangerous unknowns to valued allies. Kethviri walked through the crowd of humans and aliens, marveling at how comfortable they all seemed with each other after just 10 years of contact, and he thought about how much had changed since that day on Vendara's cradle when he had watched in terror as everything he knew about the universe was proven wrong. A hand touched his shoulder and he turned to find Captain Vasquez standing behind him. Older now, but still with those same calm, amused eyes that saw everything and feared nothing. "Ambassador," she said with a warm smile, "I am glad you could make it. I know Earth is not the most comfortable place for your species." "I would not have missed this for anything," Kethviri replied. "Your crew changed the course of galactic history, and I was honored to witness it." "We just did what humans do," Vasquez said with a shrug. "We saw a problem and we solved it, and if that required punching some oversized bugs, then that is what we were going to do." Kethviri marveled at her casual dismissal of what had been one of the most significant events in recent galactic history, and he realized that this was perhaps the most human thing about her. This inability to see herself as special or heroic when she had simply done what came naturally. The ceremony began, and Kethviri was called to the stage to deliver remarks, and he looked out at the crowd of humans and aliens and felt something he had never expected to feel for these chaotic, reckless, impossible creatures. He felt pride. "I have been asked many times over the past 10 years, he began, his translator rendering his crystalline harmonics into human speech, why the galaxy has come to fear a simple phrase, and why 4 words can clear a room faster than a plasma breach warning." He paused and let his gaze sweep across the audience, seeing humans grinning at each other and aliens listening with careful attention, all of them united in this moment of celebration and remembrance. "It is because those words are a promise," he continued, "a promise that what follows will defy probability and ignore self-preservation and, most importantly, will work, because the universe is vast and dangerous and most species have learned to fear it, but humans learned something different." He looked at Captain Vasquez and Dave and Chen and all the others who had been there that day, all of them watching him with expressions of warmth and friendship that he treasured more than any diplomatic achievement of his career. "Humans learned to make the universe fear them," he said. "And for that, I think we should all be grateful, because having the Deathworlders on our side means the galaxy is a little bit safer for everyone." He raised a glass of water, since his crystalline biology could not process alcohol no matter how much the humans wished he could join them in their drinking. "To the Deathworlders," he said, "may the rest of us always have enough warning to run." The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Kethviri felt his crystalline heart swell with emotion as he watched humans and aliens celebrating together like old friends. From somewhere in the back of the room, he heard a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Hey, Kethviri!" Dave called out, and the ambassador turned to see his old friend holding a bottle of beer with that familiar grin on his bearded face. "Hold my beer!" Kethviri sighed and set down his glass and began walking toward the exit with the practiced ease of someone who had learned through hard experience exactly what those words meant. Behind him, he heard laughter and the sound of chairs being pushed back as other experienced aliens followed his lead, and he smiled to himself as he walked, because some things would never change. The humans would always be reckless and bold and completely convinced that they could handle anything the universe threw at them. And the galaxy would always watch them with a mixture of terror and admiration and something that felt very much like love. And whenever someone said, "Hold my beer," the smart ones would run, but they would always come back, because life with humans was never boring, and after 10 years of knowing them, Kethviri had discovered something surprising about himself. He would not want it any other way. As he reached the exit, he heard a crash behind him, followed by wild cheering, and he shook his crystalline head and laughed and stepped outside to wait for whatever chaos the humans had created this time. The universe was vast and dangerous and full of wonders, and the Deathworlders were just getting started. And that thought, strange as it seemed, filled him with hope.